Exactly.
Test, test.
Make sure you're muted on WebEx.
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome.
Thank you all for your patience for I will say my technology human error that was happening over here. So thank you all for your patience, and thank you for those of you who are joining us. We will officially call our policy meeting to order. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for joining us. We actually have enough board members to actually officiate our policy business, so we will start with the first order of business, and that is to approve our minutes. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please note by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. The motion carries. Thank you. And just a quick reminder, which it sounds, I can't tell from this side, but make sure your mic is on since we're on WebEx. Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you, Mr. Scott and Dr. Crane, for joining us. As we begin out with our first policy, excuse me, which is high school spectator event bag requirements. I will turn it over to the two of you.
Before we do that, can we approve the minutes?
We did.
Wow.
Mr. Hershey, then Dr. Ing.
That was, okay, I apologize, y'all. Thank you.
You were reading.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone. So today we're just bringing an informational item on high school spectator bag event requirements. Just a few background information. Back in April of last year, we had a high school principals meeting where they brought forward some things that they wanted some guidance on. This was one of those things. So in response to that, we crafted a group that sat down and started beginning looking at how we could meet that need. And this really, so I don't want to call it policy, it's a rule that we were trying to put in place. So that has come to fruition, and we have already pushed this through by Tharrington Smith. It's gone to the chiefs, it's gone to SLT. It's passed through my office. Everyone has signed off on it, and so today we're just here to let you take a look at it. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to take them at this time.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mahaffey.
Thank you. I'm just curious if these sizes for these bags and what have you are standard to what you would see if you're at another event. I know there are other sports organizations and theaters that have size limits. Is this standard to what they would see there, so we're not buying a whole?
Yes, ma'am. And
set
the
of
other thing
things?
that we did, so we looked at some of the bag sizes, and it's kind of some stuff's kind of replaced. There's some stuff that like the Carolina Hurricanes use. They have dimensions for their stuff. Some other school districts, we looked at all those things, and I actually went on a couple websites to make sure that like Walmart, Target, and Amazon easily could find these things, and so that's where we are. And I want to make sure you know that, you know, if and when we get this up and running, we're going to evaluate it 30 days after we do that. And if we need to change, we have a stipulation here that we can change the dimensions of the bags if it becomes something where it's harder for people to get them or they're not around. We can easily make that change.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the dimensions being in there in case somebody has questions, and I appreciate the flexibility that's built into this.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Hershey.
Thank you for bringing this to us. This is already going on at Millbrook High School.
Correct.
How has it been going there?
Without problem, without issue. And I think that's part of the other thing that the principals wanted was that consistency across the district, right? So you don't want to have it going on at Millbrook and have it not going on somewhere else, or a school selecting one dimension size at this high school and selecting a different dimension size at another high school. This way, this document will make something that's consistent for everybody to follow. But they haven't had any, the principals that were brought into our discussion group, the principal at Millbrook was one of them, because we wanted to get his feedback as to how did his community react to it, how well it was working, and super praise across the board.
I also know that, I'm pretty sure Cardinal Gibbons also has this policy, so some of our other schools and parents have that, when they go there for sporting events, have already had to do this. One question I have, though, is I'm seeing at the very bottom, in addition, each attendee is permitted to bring the following loose items, so long as any compartments capable of storage are left open and empty, and that includes coats and a coat pocket. Is that realistic, and how are we checking that?
So what we're asking them to do is, if you're coming up with a jacket that's clearly got something in it, it's harder to conceal that if the zipper's open. If you zip something closed, and we're not going to go through every pocket of every person's jacket, it's just what we're asking you to do when you come.
Okay.
It's not that we're going to, TSA search your clothing.
Right.
But if you follow what we're asking, the less likelihood that we'll have problems with people bringing things in.
Got it. Well, I really appreciate you guys bringing this to us. I think it's a really smart idea, a good idea. I think it's just an extra layer of safety and security for our high schools, and I support it 100%.
Thanks, sir.
Ms. Mahaffey?
And does this extend to other events other than athletic events, like award ceremonies or plays, musicals, et cetera?
Yes, ma'am. That's
What is
why.
the reach of this?
Yes, ma'am. That's why we titled it Spectator Event Bag Requirements and not Sporting Event. So if it's a play or whatever they're having, it would extend to that as well.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Hersh?
And this is only for high schools at this point?
That's correct.
Okay. One point, I think we had a couple items raised to us by one group, and they just asked about if students, I'm scrolling through the email real quick.
While you bring that up, one of the,
Sure.
I think that you may be looking to, one of my high schools actually does not use a clear bag policy, but they actually do allow their students to check their book bags or whatever personal items at South Garner, and they don't let them into the games with anything other than like a coat, but they don't require clear bags. And so that's my question is, have we looked at schools who have used more equitable policies like a South Garner who hasn't moved to a clear bag, but don't allow bags in so they can check them? They have a tent that they've kept them under, I've noticed. Again, it's a book bag. It's a school that has transportation issues, so students generally aren't leaving campus before coming. I was at a football game. That's where I watched it happen. So they didn't go home in between school and the game, and they were able to leave their backpacks at the tent and then come into the game. So I'm
So-
curious if there are other schools who've looked at practices, and did the principals discuss that?
So I would love to talk to the principal at South Garner about that.
I don't think it was his. He's a new principal, but they kept it going his first
Okay.
season.
Love to talk to him about that, and I definitely will. I think part of what this helps do, though, is if you're coming from one school that doesn't have one to a school that does have
Mm-hmm.
one, it puts everyone doing the same thing. And that's really what I think the principals would like to get to, is that everyone is doing the same.
Well, that's why I
thing.
asked,
But,
did
yeah.
he bring this? One, I agree. One of the things that's important to me is consistency, no matter, especially because these schools actually play each other and go to each other's
Absolutely.
events, even if
Yes,
it's
ma'am.
not a sporting event. They go see their friends and plays. And that's why I was asking, because I personally thought that was a good practice, because it allowed those students who couldn't leave
To
the
stay.
school to
Mhm.
still
Absolutely.
have somewhere to put a book bag that clearly they've had since 7 o'clock that morning.
Yep, yes, ma'am. And I will tell you, I will definitely look into that.
At least as an alternative.
Mhm, absolutely.
for
They got-
school. Not, and I was saying that in addition to this policy.
Yes.
Not
In place of,
exclusionary.
right, absolutely.
And to echo that, when I was at, I had games in Durham this year, kids were just leaving their backpacks where
At
they
the
went
fence.
in, at the fence.
I saw that too.
Which is,
That's not.
if the weather's nice, that's fine. I don't know that I would leave it, especially if they have devices in it. But one of the other items that was brought up by a member of the community was, what about teens that might have feminine hygiene products? And, they don't want to have that in a clear bag. There could be anything that might be personal and private are we making sure that we are having some sort of flexibility for that?
Correct.
Okay. Can you say that?
Correct, yes, sir. That
Okay.
There'll be that flexibility. We're not going to, this is not meant to exclude every single thing.
Right.
Clearly, if someone has a medical need or a bag that needs to bring something in, or a diaper bag, there's some level of discretion that we're going to be able to use.
Okay, thank you very much.
Regarding discretion, does that mean you're going to have a RMP so that they're, again, using the same practices across schools?
And we'll,
Because that's a good point of discretion.
Well, this isn't a policy.
Right.
So this is basically a rule out of the Office of Security, right? So it's not a policy, doesn't go in our manual, wouldn't have an RMP, could have further,
defining qualities to it.
definition or examples, et cetera. So
Of course,
that's an
that would
option.
be my recommendation. If we're talking about consistency across schools, I think you're right. That's a,
I would envision how this is going to work is, again, this is new, right? So it's something that the district is doing for the first time. I think that a 30-day evaluation, and I think we've put in here that that's what we're going to do, is we're going to evaluate where this is, and we'll adjust it as needed. Maybe the dimensions of the bag need to be increased. Maybe the dimensions of the bag are too big. Maybe we need to make exceptions for certain types of medical bags that we're seeing more of that I haven't thought of that may show up, and then we need to put that in here. So I think this is getting it off the ground and getting it moving, and then we can tweak it as we go along. And I'm sure that this will get tweaked as we go on. This will
I
not.
like that. It's a living, breathing document, which all of our policies and practices should be.
Should be, correct.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Mr. Hershey. And then Ms. Caulfield.
And not for you guys, but really for the board also, as we are eliminating lockers, and as we have kids that are going to stay at school, particularly high schools, for indoor events, we have to make sure that from a facility standpoint, we were thinking about where we're going to have a space for them. And if we're getting rid of all the lockers, that eliminates a big space for them. So
That's
just
another really good point.
wanted to put that out there.
Just for clarity, I want to make sure we understand, this is not for school bags. This is after event bags. I just want to make sure, that I know that you're not putting that, I just want to make sure that people hear that's what this is for.
Oh, so you're saying a backpack, people can walk right in?
No, well, I
from
want you
school.
to make sure that you understand that this is after school.
Right, but if you have a after-school JV game or a wrestling match or anything,
And that's
kids are going to hang
what
out.
we're going to have to look at.
Right, so I was kind of saying it to the board and for the facilities team to hear that needs to be something they think about in design, and because we're actively taking lockers out of schools right now.
Absolutely.
So I just want them to think about that, not for you guys so
Yep.
much.
Absolutely.
Okay. Ms. Caulfield?
Hi. Thank you, and I just wanted to say thank you for setting it up and being in the boardroom today. I appreciate the flexibility there. My question, I always appreciate more safety that we have in the schools, so definitely appreciate this conversation. Along with the clear bags, are we doing any kind of wand check?
That's not part of this, ma'am, no.
Okay, so I guess my concern is that we have that we wouldn't have a full security, just because there are some times that, you know, they could have it in their person, on their person. So I wonder if we could explore the wand check, since they do have to check their tickets online anyway. Like when they come, they have to show the ticket to get in. Would we be able to explore the wand so that we know that it's not just the bag, but their body is also clear of any weapons?
We can absolutely explore that.
Okay, and thank you. And then my other question is for students, they're, especially like football, basketball, track, they will go directly from class, like to the activity and their game. So they will be there the whole time. What do they do with those bags? I know, like, for example, depending on which sport he's showing up for, my son could have backpack in the front, backpack in the back. You know, he looks like a pack horse going to school. So what do all those kids do if they go straight to game with all of their private and personal belongings?
Let me make sure I'm clear on what you're asking me. If I'm playing a sport, like I'm a soccer player or a football player, what am I doing with the bags and the things I brought to go to school for the day? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, because they also have, their bags consist of the gear for them to play after school.
So if you're football players, they typically have a locker room that they put their things in. And this is for spectators, not for participants. So if you're a participant, the soccer players, the soccer team will be going into the game, into the fenced area as a team. They'll be taking their stuff with them because, as you mentioned, they have gear that they need to bring in to the game to participate in whatever sport it is, whether it's soccer or lacrosse, football or whatnot. But this is for the spectators that are sitting in the game as a visitor.
Okay, so just to clarify, like, because track, they don't have lockers. So this is more for the spectators walking through the door, other ones that this is applying to, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And how long will it be for us to revisit, seeing as it is new, and we are, flexible with how it's going to look, like getting it off the ground? So do you know how long we plan to try it out at all the schools first before we review it?
I would envision that if it were to launch February 1, March 1, we'd ask principals how it's working for them and then get that feedback. But I think you need to have at least a couple games under your belt as a principal to see how it's working to provide that feedback. And if there's something that is glaring that comes out immediately, we'll address it immediately.
Sure. Well, that's perfect. So that's very quick response back to Chet. Thank you. That's the only questions that I have.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands. Thank you for being amenable to taking a trial run at this and circling back to us. And again, thank you and the principals for working through this and seeing the need to keep revisiting.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Ken. Our second item on the agenda is a policy migration in the 3000 series. This is Comprehensive Health Education Program 3540. It will replace our current 5120 Healthful Living Education and 5120 R&P Healthful Living with both a new policy 3540 and a new R&P. So we have kind of two things here. And we have Brian Glendenning and Drew Cook to walk us through this.
Thank you very much. Welcome.
I will also add that we included numerous backup documents for this item because we wanted to be really transparent with you and everyone who might be listening about the statutes that are involved behind it. We've included the School Board Association's model policy with footnotes that make all the statutory references clear as well. We've included the 6.8 and 9.12 health standards.
Correct.
Right? So we wanted to make sure that you had all of these resources at your hands and folks who are interested in looking and listening as well. So that's why there are like 8 or 9 backup documents here.
Thank you for walking us through the list of documents and for including them. Mr. Glendenning.
Good afternoon. So as I go through the policy, I'm going to start with policy 3540. And I will make a reference to the standards or general statute, those 8 documents that you have as I go. And I'll periodically take pauses for any clarifications. But I will try to do my best to say, this is document 2 or this is document 5 or that's where these items are coming from. So to get started, I want to make a clarification. Our old policy 5120 was a healthful living education policy. Healthful living encompasses both health education and physical education. This policy, the State Board Association policy, is a health education policy, which is 1/2 of our healthful living offering. This is not PE that we'll be discussing primarily in this policy, but it is mostly what occurs in the classroom for health education. So thinking about middle school has a healthful living class. Students go to health class, and then they go to the PE, to take PE in the gym. Elementary is, when you think PE, it's mostly in the gym, and there are other elective opportunities in high school that might be some or portions of that. So just to delineate, this is mostly health education that we will be discussing. The R&P that we'll discuss, which is item 8, will actually more clarify what healthful living education, the definition of that, and talk more so about physical education and protocols to follow regarding PE. The purpose of this policy is to direct our health education and instruction. The State Board Association policy really focuses on that objective. If you look at paragraph 1 of the State Board Association policy, 3540, you'll see that it ensures on ensuring the alignment to state law and state board policy. We have an additional item that we have added in blue, which really refers to our NCDPI objectives, those objectives for health education, which our teachers are required to follow as students matriculate. And we want to make sure that everything that we're doing is age appropriate and aligned with those standards. So those standards, again, those are items 6 and 7. You can look at our middle school health standards or our high school health standards as we're having discussions about this. If I refer to those, that's where those references are occurring. If we go to the first paragraph of Section A under Comprehensive Health Program, that entire paragraph is essentially derived from General Statute 115C.25, which is item 4 that governs health education in general in our state. And again, this is coming from State Board Association verbiage, but if you're wondering where those items that are listed are coming from, those are straight from General Statute. For paragraph 2 of Section A, the first item is verbiage directly out of SB 49, and it deals with health education from kindergarten through 4th grade, talking about gender identity, sexual activity, or sexuality not being included in the health education program for kindergarten through 4th grade. The item in blue just further clarifies that the standards, the health education standards in North Carolina do not have discussions that are based in gender identity or sexuality. They have reproductive health things, they have functionality standards and objectives, but there is no standard that is teaching about those particular items that are focused in K4, but there's no focus on that at all in our health education standards currently through high school. As you go through the paragraph 2, the other verbiage in paragraph 2 is derived from General Statute 115C.30, which is reproductive health and safety. The final sentence of that pulls verbiage from our current policy, which is 5120. So that statement, no Wake County Public School System employee shall provide information to any student about where to obtain contraceptives and or abortion referral services. That is straight from our current policy. It is also in alignment with general statute, and the general statute states that it has that statement as an option for school systems. So that is a carryover, and it was not in the State Board Association policy. So that is a carryover from 5120. And the reason that we felt that it needed to be in there is because it demonstrates the alignment with North Carolina general statute. I'm going to move on to Section B. So for Section B, that verbiage is derived straight from the 115C 81.30, that's reproductive health and safety. The main piece in here, you'll see that the media center item is struck, and the reason for that is, especially coming out of COVID, the opportunity to view materials has expanded, and we don't just keep all of our reproductive health and safety items in the middle school media center and the high school media center. So There might be online opportunities for parents to be able to have a Google Meet with a teacher and they run through the things, or they might be able to find it in the office or in a classroom, so we struck Media Center out of that to make it broader. The remaining verbiage in there is, again, just straight out of 115C-81.30. And then in Section C, this is Board Association, and North Carolina Board Association verbiage, and it reiterates the alignment to standards, and that teachers must be trained through a module-based course and complete all work prior to sharing reproductive health with students. We have had a module-based online training for every teacher that has done human growth and development in 5th grade and reproductive health and safety in 7th, 8th, and high school. That has been in existence. I've been doing this for 12 years, and it's been in existence for those 12 years. And it's online. Teachers must go through all the statutory requirements, all the policy requirements, and what's required of our standards. And they must take quizzes for each unit that they are going to present to students and make sure that they pass those quizzes prior to making those presentations. So that is an overview of 3540, and any questions that you have, I'm happy to field at the moment.
Thank you. Any questions? Well, Mr. Glendenning, that is impressive. You so explicitly.
Wipe the sweat from
I
the
don't
back.
blame you. You explicitly described what the changes from and where they were from, and the supporting aid documents were very helpful. So, seeing no questions, I will not hold you here. We can actually move forward with our.
I do have one more
process.
item, which is the RNP.
Yes.
If you have a second for that. And I will just explain this very quickly, being that it's RNP. You'll look at, this is item 8. There is a lot of struck information there in blue, and the reason that it is all struck is because it is now inclusive of the State Board Association Policy 3540. So those items are either statutory and linked to 3540 through the statutory requirement, or they are explicitly stated in 3540. So now the new.
So this is where I can ask my questions about the PACER test? No.
Yes,
just
sure.
kidding.
So this will now be 3540 RNP, and Section A will make that delineation of what healthful living education is. It's half health, half PE. And then now item B in that is the physical education procedures and practices that schools can follow. It's RNP, it's not policy, so these are suggested actions for physical education. They are aligned with North Carolina Healthy Active Children policy. So those guidelines come straight from that policy. And now I am done, unless there's other questions.
I'll make a motion that we move the policy to action at the next board meeting where it's fitting.
Okay.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please note by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. The motion carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Glendale. I was giving you the hook off because we only have to vote on the policy, but thank you
Yeah,
for
I know.
thank you
I
for sharing
should've
the
just-
changes on the
I should've
RP.
just stuck with it. Thank you.
You know us. You know I'm always going to ask a question about RP, so
But you'll
I
notice
appreciate
that
it.
the change in this one, like we had the big debate last time about should it be in the media center in the office here, you just make it available.
put
and
it
don't
right there
have that
online.
level of specificity, and so give them flexibility.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I'm looking for our
Me too.
HR folks to join us.
And Ms. Caulfield does have a
Any more
question now.
Oh. Well, we didn't discuss PE, so we'll have to circle back to it because, well, we've also let them leave the building. My apologies, Ms. Caulfield. That's why I'm sorry I asked in the chat if you had questions. We were only talking about healthful living, not the PE section, as he noted earlier. However, if you have follow-up questions, Mr. Glendenning has left, so if you have questions, you certainly can send them to us.
That's okay, thank you. I think my hand kept disappearing when I went on and off with mute.
It did, and that's why I think I typed into chat, because I was like, I thought I saw your hand, but then it went away. So when I don't see it, I'll ask you in the chat if you have a question.
Okay, thank you.
they're the remaining of our agenda. Well,
Okay,
almost.
they're on their way.
Okay, thank you.
Our HR folks are on their way.
Thank you.
Mr. Glendinning was too thorough and fast.
Well, I started laughing because I was like, I mean, they are the rest of the agenda. So we can't skip to anything else because it's all them.
We are resuming sort of the rest of our migration project. The last piece of the SB 49 revisions were handled in the migration of 3540 with the inclusion of the language about the pre-K 4.
Okay.
So all of SB 49 revisions are handled now with this migration, and we can resume our regularly scheduled content.
Thank you. Because that list keeps growing and did not stop growing in the absence.
No, and revisions keep happening
They
in the
do.
background too.
That's right.
So we are hoping to pick up some pace here in our 7,000 series.
Thank you.
Ms. Johnson-Hauser, Dr. Taylor just asked, how long have we been engaged in this policy migration?
So he must have read my mind because I was going to ask Mr. Ramey, are we the longest, are we taking the longest of any board in the state to migrate? I feel like we
I
are.
don't have many comparators, but I will say I appreciate that you're doing it thoughtfully and carefully.
Good answer.
And adopting policies that you want and need, and not just policies that someone else has to agree.
Because I remember hearing this was supposed to be a 2-year migration?
Yes, that was my answer every time somebody said, why aren't you working on policy X? And I was like, we're migrating.
And that was about 8 years ago?
Yes.
Yeah.
And now we're trying to, do a hybrid of migration and updates that board members are interested in, which we took quite the hiatus for SB 49. Dr. Matillo, you will have to do all of them yourself now that you're here. I'm kidding. Maybe. We'll be light on you until your team arrives. You can catch your breath. Okay.
I'll go ahead and get started. They are on their way.
Okay.
Thank you for your patience. And good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We are bringing 4 policies today as part of the policy migration: 7100, 7110, 7120, and 7130. These are some of my favorite policies to bring because they also replace some of the old policies in the manual and get some of our HR policies together. So we will be starting with policy 7100, and that is our policy that goes over, talks about recruitment and selection, and that probably contains some of our heaviest edits to the school board's policy. So that's where we will start.
Mr. Haggard.
And just as a reminder, for those of us looking at the revised policy, can you tell us the difference between the red text and the blue text?
Yeah, so the red text is a North Carolina School Board Association addition or revision to their policy. So that's, you'll see the red text
So
there.
they added 40 and older,
That is correct.
which all
I
of us
didn't
40 and
know.
older noted.
Yes. Yes.
Exactly.
And then the blue language is language that's come from our staff.
That has come from our staff, yes.
thank
And 7100 was an existing policy for us. Some of that we had brought previously. Some of these other policies would be new coming into the 7000 series.
Thank you.
Yep. And there's my team. introduced the policies we're bringing, clarified the red language in 7100, and we're ready to start going over the 7100 when y'all are ready.
Good afternoon, everyone. We apologize for our delay. Thank you for your patience, and thank you, AJ. We will start with policy 7100, if that's okay. So this is an existing policy for us. We've already previously adopted policy 7100, and as we are going through the migration process, we look back to see what sorts of things we might need to modify, and also to incorporate some of the language from the School Boards Association's recommendations. So the first thing that you'll see is that there's a recommendation from the school boards to add the age 40 or older in the policy. That's just being compliant with the legal requirements. It also indicates here, one of the changes that we made in was that when we added the language that are permitted by law. So there are some situations where sex, age, other qualifications may be required or for a position. So we wanted to just make it clear, we don't do that all the time, but there may be some times when law requires us to do that. And so the policy already provided that option in here, that language in here, but just for clarification, we added that language about when it's permitted by law. The next paragraph, we added in language about our equity policy and references to our equity policy here. We also pulled in prior language from our prior policy that talked about the board making efforts to employ individuals with disabilities. We added to that other historically underrepresented groups and added that as a sentence to the policy. As we are moving forward with migration, just as a reference for you, there are multiple policies that we hope to remove as we go through these policies. So we have taken language from those other policies and attempted to incorporate them and add them here so that we can truly migrate, get rid of the old policies, and have the relevant language in new policies as we move forward. So this is one where we've gotten some of the past language from a prior policy and incorporated here. With section B, under recruitment, we just changed that to a more general reference rather than specifically referencing the finance officer there. We also added interim positions because that's the position where we may need some more flexibility with regard to the posting of positions. Section C, with regard to criminal history, again, this is somewhere that we have pulled language from our prior policy language and reflecting some of our current practices just to make sure that that's consistent and to be able to remove some of those prior policies, as we've said, as a part of the migration. So we incorporated language about, making sure that criminal record checks are done, that people have to provide consent for those checks, that we will consider dispositions when we are making hiring decisions. Here you see some language that references a new section recommended by the School Boards Association. We also, kind of in the middle of this page, added language from our old policy basically saying that if an applicant is hired prior to their completion of a criminal record check, they would be considered conditional pending a review of the results of the check. Another modification that we made, and again, the blue is modification to our existing policy. Another modification is that we make it clear that anyone, for all applicants, not just those living or working in North Carolina, but for all applicants, we conduct a North Carolina statewide criminal record check. And then in addition to that, in Section 2, for those applicants who have also lived and worked outside of North Carolina during the 7 years prior, we changed it from 5 years to 7 because the law that deals with criminal record checks, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, mostly references 7 years, or 7 years is kind of the minimum, in some places, the maximum that you can go back for 7 years. But we reference 7 years because that's at least what we would do. We do a greater check than that. We check for any information from 18 years on up with our folks. One thing I would like to recommend as a change that we did not do, in the last sentence of Section 2 here, it says the administration will conduct record checks in all states identified, but in fact, we check, some states have a better statewide criminal record system, like North Carolina. Our system is really good. Everybody reports their information into our statewide system. Other states have better county systems than statewide systems. So we'd like to change that to, instead of in all states identified, to say in the jurisdictions identified. That way, if there's not a strong state check, we're still, or there is not a statewide system at all, we're still doing those county checks as well with regard to those folks. And we also, for your information, also conduct international checks as well within that 7-year period. So we try to be very thorough to make sure we have good people who are safe to put in front of our kids and our staff. On the next page, again, this is a reference to Section D here, which is the policy dealing with the criminal history checks of child care providers. Both red sections here talk about those criminal record checks and the requirements for people working in licensed pre-K classrooms. The second section of red in the middle of the policy makes it clear that any exceptions, any modifications, when we're looking at criminal record checks, we have to look at individual ones. We have to determine based upon several different factors whether that criminal record check will prevent someone from being hired or if they can be hired. But this makes it clear that with those people under the DCDEE or the pre-K checks, that whatever determination is made with those checks, that's what is going to be the prevailing requirement there. And so going into Section D, again, this section deals with licensed pre-K classrooms. And it lays out the process for checking criminal records of folks in licensed pre-K classrooms. This is something that the district has been doing already. It's a requirement that we've had. There was a change in this requirement so that these checks last for 5 years instead of 3 years like they used to have. And that's something that our district communicated to our principals on, I believe, last summer with regard to that change in the law. But this is basically codifying in policy something that is already being done by the district. With regard to the other modifications in the policy, those are modifications just putting in appropriate descriptors, like, for example, with our central office staff, adding in the different names of positions with those staff members. This is clarifying in the nepotism section near the bottom of the page, section 2B, small 2, that information with regard to someone having a family relationship with an administrator or someone else has to be disclosed prior to the board taking action. And just for your information, our application actually asks applicants if they are related to other employees or members of the Board of Education. So that is something that we do know early on. Finally, in the end of section 3 here, it just indicates that new hires will be reported to the state as required by law. That's something that comes from our old policy and is a requirement that we, as well as all employers in North Carolina, have to do. So those are the main changes in that policy. If this policy is adopted, then we will be able to remove from the old manual policies 2303/3003/4003. We will also be able to remove, from that manual, policies 3010/4010 which is the Equal Employment Opportunities Policy. And I'll go back one. Policy 2303 is our criminal record checks policy. We'll also be able to remove Policy 3020/4020, which is recruitment and selection. Policy 3022/4022, which is hiring procedures. Policy and R&P 3034, 4034, 6434, which is registered sex offenders. And Policy 3310/4310, advertising vacancies. So there are a lot of policies that we will be able to clean up from the old manual once this policy is adopted. So I'll take any questions, if that's okay.
Yes, Ms. Mahaffey, and then I have one from Ms. Caulfield.
Having never been in a position to hire anyone besides our board applicants and the superintendent, it states in here that the position will be open for 5 days and posted for 5 days. Is that long enough, given that we're having some shortages in some staffing positions, in order for something to be posted? Or what is the general practice compared to that 5 days?
So the 5 days is a minimum.
Okay.
And so positions are frequently posted beyond that until the supervisor or the hiring administrator feels like they have appropriate applications that they can go ahead and move forward with in terms of that. So that's the minimum, but certainly not the maximum.
I'm just thinking, if I'm applying for a job and all of a sudden I see it, and then 2 days later, it was posted 2 days before and it's going to go 2 days later, is that enough time for me to get my, especially if I don't have anything in, it's not Appletrack anymore. iSIMS, to make sure that that gets uploaded. And so that, again, like I said, I've not been in that position where I've posted a job before besides Dr. Taylor and folks sitting at this table, but thank you.
Yeah, and I will say it is very rare that a position would be filled and taken down in 5 days. Generally, it is much longer than that we're advertising, going through the interview process, and even when we go through the interview process, we might keep that posting up just in case additional applicants come in.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Ms. Mahaffey. Yes, it would be very rare that we would have a posting taken down in 5 days. I mean, generally, it is much longer than that, and we would keep it posted even while, the team might be going through an interview process just to make sure that we're getting any qualified
It
applicant.
just seems tight and like you already know who you want to hire if you're doing it for 5 days.
Yeah.
Ms. Caulfield's question is back to my earlier gist, and that is, what positions would be required for those who are over 40? Is there an example or certain positions?
So, it's interesting because when this language is added in, I try to think about, would there be specific positions where we require someone of a certain age? And nothing came to mind for me. I know if there are potential for, sex, we may have someone, a student who might have some personal care needs where the parent and, and in the best interest of the student, we might need to have someone of a certain sex in terms of administering those sorts of procedures for the student. Nothing pops to my mind about 40 or older, but again, I think this clarification is in here just to make it clear that that's the protected part of the law. It's not necessarily saying we are trying to do anything with that. We, right now, correct me if I'm wrong, AJ, but right now we don't have any positions where we're saying there must be an age related to that. But this is just to clarify that that is the age that would be in the protected categories.
That's exactly right. That's under the ADEA, which protects people over 40 from age discrimination.
Now that the question's been asked, I'm looking at it again, and it might make possibly more sense to clarify the 40 or older after the first reference to age, because the first part of that really is about the equal employment clause, and then we get into the exceptions. And I don't know, just looking at it, maybe it would help to move the 40 or older up. I don't know what the team thinks, but.
Chair
Yeah.
Haggerty?
I was going to say, because we can think of examples where, as you mentioned, with needing employees of a certain gender for certain checks might be important. Likewise, there's some jobs that will require certain physical ability, but if we can't contemplate anything where age would be a requirement, or a minimum age would be a requirement, do we want to lock ourselves into that in policy?
Well, I mean, I think that, again, the way it's written in here is to make it clear that there are some legal exceptions that can be done there, and to the extent that, I mean, we can't always anticipate what our needs will be, but this makes it clear that we're going to follow, we will, if permitted by law, we can do that, but only for people who are 40 or older. But I do like AJ's suggestion of moving the 40 or older up to the first reference of age, which is, I guess, the prior line up, to make it clear that that is the protection for any sort of age protections in the law, age discrimination under the ADEA.
Were you going to say something?
Just that I do think that it seems a better fit of the two positions to me, and it gets the same point across.
Okay. Mr. Haggerty?
I guess that makes it clear, but my question was in section C, where it says the added language is, except as otherwise provided in section D of this policy, applicants must notify. Can you explain that to me and then reference it in section D where that is supposed to? I don't particularly understand this additional language, or how it would, just the impact.
The impact of that,
Yes.
that language. And that is language that, again, was recommended to us by the School Boards Association, so we put it in there as their new recommended language. What I suspect is that, that the folks under that category, they are approved by, under the DCDEE process, so their whole approval process and their notification of charges and all of that are kind of implicated by the DCDEE process. If you'll see in the next to the last paragraph, it talks about pending charges. I'm sorry, the next to the last of the red paragraph. It talks about pending charges, notification within 5 business days or before returning to work, whichever comes first. So there is still a notification requirement of that, and then a requirement on the assistant superintendent to notify DCDEE as well. So I think it's just that because they have very specific rules about how the folks who are who go through the background check through that DCDEE process, that's referencing, okay, these are the rules for
Are we making
everybody.
it overly complicated? I mean, do we not want, I mean, would it be problematic if we didn't have that language in there? I'm just not understanding. I hear what you're saying, that they go through something else, but do we not, it doesn't seem clear.
So I
Go
can
ahead.
only speak,
Sure.
when I was teaching in a different state, and it might be the same for North Carolina, the rules and requirements for someone that works in an elementary school were very different from someone who worked in a preschool or daycare setting. And so I'm reading this as, this is for someone who is an employee in our preschool program or someone who might work in an after-school program. And if that is the case, I wonder if we need to clarify that a little more explicitly, saying it's someone who works in the preschool or after-school space or whatever those spaces are here in North Carolina, because those licensing requirements are much more, they're quite cumbersome.
I would agree, that would be fine, just some sort of clarity on that would be fantastic.
Let me, if I can, just to clarify. So as you see, Section D is entitled Criminal History Checks of Child Care Providers, and are you saying there to indicate more? Because that defines what the different
Yeah.
what's considered a childcare provider? Or are you talking about, is that what you're, is that what you're meaning, Ms.
I'm
Hirsch?
interpreting it as yes, like in 1 or 2, adding, a employee of the pre-K program or whatever maybe we have to reach out to Dawn Dawson or do a little more digging to see
Perhaps we can,
what that would be in the context of Wake County Public Schools, because if I'm a parent reading this, it's a little confusing.
so it does apply to those who are working in licensed pre-K classrooms, but it also applies to those people who may be alone with kids who are covered by this. So some of the checks that we have related to this deal with some of our transportation employees, some of our principal level people. So it's difficult. I'm worried, but we can look into it. I don't want to limit it or say something that makes people think they are excluded from this when they in fact are covered by these searches. And if you see in the definitions, the first definition talks about somebody seeking to work in the classroom or the program that's licensed, basically the licensed pre-K classroom. But number 2 talks about any person who has unsupervised contact with children enrolled in such classrooms. And so that's why even our processes right now where we're doing those checks, they go beyond the people who are just in the classrooms. There are administrators who get these checks. There are people who may be on buses with those kids who get these checks because they may be alone with kids who are in the licensed pre-K classroom. So,
I
but-
appreciate you clarifying
I
that,
totally
Ms. Hill.
read this very
Thank you.
simply put, that all the answers are in D. In addition, this section also applies. So I thought that's why they put that in the red. So I read that totally far more simplistic. Is that?
Yeah, so it's except as otherwise.
Exactly.
provided.
So I was like, I think that's just telling you it's that except what it says in D when it applies differently. I think that's all that sentence is drawing your attention to.
Yeah, I think if you look at 1 and 2, that really does define the pre-K class or program.
Right.
So I think it's already in there in 1 and 2.
We can.
That's how I read it too.
I am certainly willing to go back and look to see if we can think of whether there's other language that makes it clear in the heading or something like that. We certainly can take a look at that. Again, my concern would be putting in language that makes people think they're not covered by this when they should be. I don't want to just call it.
That's why I thought it was there. I was like, it's saying, no, you still have to do this. So maybe it's that simple
We'll take a look.
as simply put, this also applies versus, because maybe it's, I don't know what it is for folks who brought this up, but maybe it's the word except, but I think it's just drawing your attention to
It is.
this
It
applies.
says, except as otherwise provided is,
So maybe it's just that language.
yes.
Okay, we'll take a look at
Maybe.
that.
Okay. Dr. Ng?
Hi, thank you. I really appreciated the inclusion of language regarding people with disabilities. I think that was very necessary. But even more so, I think the word qualified that goes right before it. I think that's for me, I think qualification, which is outlined further down the document, that supersedes anything in my book. So I think that qualified definitely, is a term that needs to be there. But I definitely appreciate, the focus on, people with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Caulfield, did you have your hand raised?
No, my question was answered.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So Dr. Crane and Ms. Hill, do you want to list, we had a couple of potential changes, revisits, before so we
So-
can say them out loud?
Yes, so my understanding was that we're going to move the 40 or older to the line earlier with regard to age. We are going to see if we can come up with some other language at the except as otherwise provided language to see if there's something to make it clear that this is inclusive.
Inclusive.
we are going to change in number 2, near the end of that page, checks in the jurisdictions rather than all states.
I don't have
And
another one.
I think that was it.
I was like, I clearly missed one, so. Dr. Crane, you were saying those are the 3 that you had as well? Okay.
Okay. Thank you all.
So what's your pleasure? Would you like to move this to first reading without these changes and you bring it back to us? Or do you want to bring it back to us?
I think we're okay moving it to first reading without the changes if you all are okay with that.
Looks like it. Okay, so I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please note by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. The motion carries. Thank you.
So our next policy is Policy 7110, information provided by applicant or employee. And this is a policy that basically incorporates some of our prior language. This is, again, a new policy from the School Boards Association, but it's one where we've had prior policies that addressed pieces of this, basically making it clear that people have to be true in the information that they provide on their application, and that people are required to update their applications. That's a section that we've added in because that's something that is on our current applications, that you're supposed to make sure that if anything changes, that you keep that information up to date. If this policy is approved, then we would be removing policy 3231. There's a section .8 which deals with this area, and we'd like to be able to strike that from that policy. There are several different other sections in that area, so we would like to be able to remove that section until the rest of that policy can be adopted at a later time. And in addition to that, we would also look at policy 2303.2. That's actually covered in the original policy that we just talked about with the 7100, but that section would obviously be removed as well. So we're trying our very best to identify those policies that we will no longer have to keep in the old manual. So that is all that we have for that one. Not a big policy, not many changes, but any questions with regard to that?
Ms. Mav?
I just had a procedural question for the policies that Ms. Hill stated, 3231, Section 8, and then 2303, I think it was Section 2 or .2. Are those then coming back to the board so that we can approve those changes as well in the striking of those sections, or is that considered a technical correction? Thank you, Dr. Crane. I appreciate you so much.
Yes.
I could not remember.
I think basically because you're taking action on it right now, you are approving the action in those other policies. That's how I'm hearing this. Neil, is that correct? Basically what I want to know is, can I email and say, would you please strike this section in the policy? I can show it as struck through in the manual online. Yep, because yeah, so it's not even a technical correction, like I don't have to bring it on the consent agenda. With
Okay.
the action that you're taking today, I can email and say, please either remove or strike through this portion of the policy with the action that you're taking.
All right, thank you for clarifying that.
You're welcome.
Mr. Hershey?
One quick question. So in policy 4231.8, you move that into in the 7110, but you didn't put the last sentence, which is violation of this policy, as grounds for dismissal. And I know in 7110 you say presenting information to human resources, but not updating is not the same as presenting. So you don't really cover, if that makes sense.
So the new language indicates presenting information to human resources that is intended to defraud, falsify, materially misrepresent, or conceal the truth will be considered just cause for terminating the application process or as a violation of board policy.
And it reads in the other one, applicants and employees are required to continuously update their application with current and correct information. Violation of this policy is grounds for dismissal. Do we need to indicate in 7110 that if you don't update, that is
So-
also part of?
That's the
Failure to
first
present.
sentence.
Wait,
Yeah.
okay, hang on, let me. But do we have to specify that it's grounds for dismissal if you're not updating? That's what I'm asking. As it does in the
Chair
other
Haggerty,
one.
but
Okay.
I think my attorneys are saying, yes, we are saying defrauding us means it's grounds for firing, but Chair Haggerty.
Okay, so I was going to take a different position, which was that, because of the way it's written, and I think it is written, you are still directing everybody to update, but dismissal for fraud requires intent.
Right.
Not just, oh, I forgot that, we updated a child's address or a relative moved in or whatever other information might change. You still want to direct as a matter of policy that they do this, and it's an expectation, but I don't think you tie a non-intentional failure to update where there's no intent of any falsification or an intentional act of omission with dismissal. So I liked how it was written,
I did too.
but if your intent was something else, then I think it should be rewritten.
No, our intent
why I
here was
liked it.
just to make it clear that they have an obligation to keep their application updated. And there are times that we have, that we will say, you need to update your application because someone failed to keep that information updated. But I think that was the only idea there, not necessarily to establish that as a dismissible offense if it is a mistake that someone made or an oversight, which we know as people move forward with different things,
Yeah. Chair Haggerty said it best. That's kind of what I was trying to drive at. I apologize for the way I did not get there.
No problem. Understood. Thank you.
So let me ask, just for clarity's sake, that we know there's the expectation that you update, but if a person fails to update, then is the idea that we have to determine that it was intent not to update?
My thought would be if someone failed to update their application without more, that in and of itself would not be something that would be grounds for dismissal without without additional indication of an intent to defraud by failing to update. So you, for example, don't put on your application that you worked somewhere because you don't want folks to know that you had bad work conditions where you work. So no one would call to check your references at that school. That's a failure to update that has other implications to it.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else with regard to that?
I was looking
one?
around and making sure Ms. Caulfield doesn't have any follow-up.
Chair Hassel?
Yes, I did want to actually ask, that this policy is pertaining to new applicants, is that correct?
It's actually pertaining to applicants or employees, because we have employees who apply for other positions within the district so it's applicants or employees.
So I'm just wondering if, say you have a long-term employee, they wouldn't have any intention, if they were there for years, they may not realize that something is not updated. Is there certain information that we're asking them to update?
So I would say generally, when employees are getting ready, when current employees are seeking a different position, we would anticipate that those employees would include an update to their application as they're moving forward to another position, so that the hiring manager in the new position knows that they've worked in, 3 or 4 different departments between the last time that they updated their application. So, but there certainly would be no thought that all employees right now sitting around should be going back in and saying, oh my goodness, where's my application, and I need to update that. So again, we would not see that as, some sort of violation because employees aren't going in and updating their applications always. But I think it's significant when you are looking for another position that those hiring managers know that your application is up to date.
Thank you for that explanation. Would it be beneficial to have, especially since it's so short, to have this on our applications as like a footnote, just so that they're reminded
It
of
is.
this information?
I'm-
It is?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Ms. Caulfield. Yes, that language, that blue language there is actually a part of our application, and that obligation to update it, and applicants actually sign, and this is me kind of going from memory, but I believe there's a place in the application.
have to
when they-
verify it
When
all.
they do their certifications, that they say they understand that
That's
they're
right.
supposed to continuously update as well. So that is in the application, if my memory serves correct.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Dr. Ng?
I will apologize in advance if this is outside of this particular policy, but just in general, just to enlighten me, are the employees, current employees, updating their information in the in our system on a annual or a regular basis? You know, like address, contact information, also in terms of any kind of, infractions and things like that.
So, that's a great question. So kind of two different things. So one in terms of in terms of address and things like that. We do within our Oracle employee self-service system, there is a way for employees to go in and update their address information and that information so that it becomes a part of Oracle, which is our employee management system. So there is a way to go in and update that information. Separate from that is the question of notifying us if there are charges and things like that. And that is something that is required. I think it's in 7100 in our criminal record check, part of our policy. Candidates are required, or employees are required to notify us when they have current charges and those sorts of things. So that is something that's already an obligation. And then a third separate thing from that is the application itself, and whether you're going in and updating the application itself. And again, that's not something that we expect employees to go in and update all the time. One possibility, if you all feel like there's confusion, is that we could make it clear that when current employees are seeking another position in the district, that's when they would be expected to update their application. But I believe this language as it's written is consistent with what's on our applications themselves. So, but that is another option if we feel like there is a lot of confusion that may be creating for our employees.
Mr. Hershey?
So the one suggestion that I would make, or I will make, is adding, and as Dr. Taylor kind of asked this, I was thinking about it, and as Chair Haggerty brought it up, maybe presenting or withholding information, adding or withholding to the Human Resources Office with the intent to defraud. That way, it's kind of raises it, if you're not presenting information and you're intentionally withholding it to defraud or to falsify, or, to not update properly.
It does, except for fraud is intent, but yeah.
It what? So I'm open to,
Can I clarify? So would you, oh, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead, sorry, go ahead, Ms. Gill.
okay.
Are you asking us to say presenting information to or withholding information from the Human Resources Office that is intended to defraud? Okay.
Again, that's if my colleagues think that that's necessary, not just for me to put out there.
I don't have strong feelings about it. I mean, employees have to verify this on the application. They're not actually going to look at this policy. They know that they had to actually verify it.
It does say material misrepresent or conceal the truth, which I would imagine would be a withhold, would be concealing the truth. But again, I'm not the, okay.
So I am comfortable with adding the or withholding information from. It just provides a little more clarification, and gives us a little more So if everyone's okay with that, I'm okay with that. Okay.
Sorry, just a suggestion, if that change is to be made, I also would also use Mr. Hershey's other suggestion to change, that is intended to defraud to with the intent to defraud, so that the whole sentence flows grammatically. So it would say presenting information to or withholding information from the human resources officer with the intent to defraud, falsify material, misrepresent, et cetera, and then I think it flows.
Dr. Crane,
Okay.
Ms. Hill, did you get that?
I did.
With instead of that was the biggest change? Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Got it. Yes, 2 changes.
Yes. Do you want to relay it back to us, or you both feel comfortable?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
So it's that same sentence, presenting information to or withholding information from the Human Resources Office with the intent to defraud, falsify, material represent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Dr. Ng?
I just want to see what you guys are feeling about the idea about clarifying the employee seeking another position or something like, is that what you were meaning earlier, right? That as an idea, so that to clarify that this is for people who are applying for a position or a different position.
So with regard to the blue section, to the extent that you all are concerned that employees may not be clear, that they don't have to go in and update their application on a daily basis, we could add in there that applicants and current employees seeking, let's see, language, seeking another position in the district.
Chair Perry?
Just, I wanted to go back and redirect to the first sentence. All information provided to the Human Resources Office. And then it says by an applicant for employment or by an employee. So I think that sentence captures all of the information, not necessarily, I don't think it parses out that it's only when someone's applying for the employment the first time or a transfer. I think because you're either an applicant or an employee in that situation, I think it would be covered. But I just wanted to present that and see what you thought.
Well, I just was, kind of thinking out loud in terms of the, whether the language would make it, for an employee feel the kind of the responsibility to do the update when they're not actually seeking employment. So, you know what I'm saying?
I'm comfortable with the clarification just because many educators are sticklers for rule followers, and I don't want somebody who's not applying for another job to feel that they need to keep updating their application.
love that you think they're reading this for sure.
Well, okay, then I just want to ask with the clarification, then does that exempt employees who are not applying for a new job then?
The way I am interpreting the suggestion made by Ms. Hill, because it's in the blue section, applicants and current employees seeking a new position are required to update their application, whereas the prior sentence, all information provided to the Human Resource Office by an applicant for employment or by an employee would cover. So I feel like there's a big umbrella, and then it goes down into specifically for keeping your application accurate. So I read it as 2 separate. You need to make sure everything's true, and then we're only talking about the application, is the way that I'm seeing those 2 things. I'm not arguing in a court of law, though.
Amended would provide that additional clarity for employees, because we want people to understand we're talking about applicants, whether you're outside the organization or inside the organization. So I think that's what you were referring to, correct? And I think, as you said, we have other policies that cover disclosures that employees are supposed to make that have nothing to do with seeking a different kind of employment.
That's correct. Okay, so I've added in now, third thing, applicants and current employees seeking another position within the district are required to update their applications, and then the rest of the blue section.
Okay. Any other questions or feedback? Dr. Green?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Could we just use external or internal applicants?
Yes, love that.
That's right. Thank you, Dr. Green.
Thank you, Dr. Crane.
That way, okay, I'll be honest. I am one of those educators, right? And I was thinking, well, how long has it been since I applied for my current position? I don't know.
That's
Where would
exactly
I go
what I
in
was
to find
feeling.
that? And if I'm thinking that of the 20,000 employees in the system who get word of this, how many of them will be calling us to ask, where do I go in and update my
The
application?
10 that'll
I
get
don't
it.
know
My
that.
Applitrack isn't
Right.
there anymore, right? What is this?
So I do think that's a great clarification, and, internal or external applicants.
So my recommendation was going to be very different, because you all know I don't think everything is designed for policy. For the 10 people of the 10,000 that are listening, I thought we should actually tell the employees this is actually what we're saying, because it's not the policy they're going to go to until you're holding them accountable for something. It is the communication that informs them what the intent was. And I think that's the thing for me about receivers. We set policy here, and we don't really actually consider how people receive information. They're not receiving it through this policy. They're receiving it through our communication. They don't look at the policy until it's being used. And so I personally still think it's the communication that needs to happen in our employee newsletter to let them know that actually this is really the intent. Because 10 people will tell 10 more people that something that actually isn't in this policy.
And we certainly can, as we go through these policies, it is our intent, and we have communicated some of these changes
You
out to our
have.
employees. And we can make it clear here that this is we're not changing anything with this policy. This has been the expectation moving forward. But are you okay with external or internal applicants? We take out and current employees.
Yes, you got a
Is
lot
that
of
what I'm
okays
hearing?
to-
The nodding of heads? So external and internal applicants are required to update their applications. Yes? I see heads nod. Okay.
Change the title as well.
No, because that's still like this deals with employees. Okay.
Okay, you have now 4 changes, or actually 3. We just
Three.
wordsmithed the third one.
Yes.
Okay.
I feel comfortable with us making these changes, and if you all are comfortable with moving forward to first reading.
Okay, thank you. I'll entertain a motion. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please note by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. The motion carries. Thank you.
Just as a reminder, typically what we do with a document, when you see it at first reading, is we highlight in yellow anything that we've changed that you have not already seen or agreed to today. So if you've already agreed to some language, like the last ones, we just agreed to very specific language, may not highlight that. But in the prior policy, if it's new language that you haven't heard, that we took the charge to go back and come up with something, we'll bring it to you at first reading, we will highlight that in yellow and make reference to it, just so that everything is very transparent.
And you will likely have to still remind me why it's yellow, but thank you.
We'll do that.
Thank you.
Okay, policy 7120 is the employee health certificate policy. This is a new policy that we're adding from migration policies, but not a new practice for us, something that we have done for a very long time. With this policy, which we are not making any suggested changes to the School Boards Association language, but with this policy, we would replace our current policy 3030/4030, which is health certificates required, and we would also replace Part N of Policy 2000, employment of administrators. We would also remove that section of that policy which speaks to health certificates.
Any questions? Ms. Mojave, then Chair Hogan.
My only question is if the employee is out of state when hired. So I know some of our employee relation or recruitment folks go to different states, get applicants if they're hired. What is the period of time that the employee has to present their health certificate? Or is it does their employment hinge on us receiving the health certificate?
Because I'm not on the hiring team, I don't know the specific time. I do know that when employees are given information about orientation and prior to being able to start on their work site, they have to have the health certificate completed. But I can't tell you specifically the time frame. And I do know that it is with the North Carolina, which is probably why you're asking that
Specifically
question.
why I'm saying for out of state, and I was just curious about that, and it's not going to change, my, support of this policy. I was just curious how that works. But I don't need my answer right now.
We
Thank
can
you.
certainly try to gather that information to just follow up with you on that. Absolutely.
Thank you. I was just curious about the origins of the policy, and is this one of those that's pretty much dictated to us by statute, or is this one that we had a lot of discretionary?
It is. It's pretty much dictated.
Okay.
That's why when
Yeah.
you asked the question, Ms. Mahaffey, I was like, it doesn't matter, it's the state law.
Yeah, so in that case, I would move adoption for first reading and just move it along
Second.
to ensure compliance with the law.
Thank you.
All in favor, please notify by saying aye. Any opposed, same sign.
Okay, so the last policy for us is policy 7130, which is the licensure policy. This, again, is a new policy, the suggested policy by the School Boards Association. What you'll see in here are the strikeouts and modifications in blue that we are recommending, and our licensure team is recommending with regard to the language of the policy. One of the things I'll ask you to note is the policy from the School Boards Association has a lot of the sort of specific policy exceptions or some of the specific language as to certain types of licenses in here. And it was the team's recommendation that we strike those and just do a general reference, what's listed as section B4 about where law otherwise authorize an individual to teach a certain topic without a license. The board may permit the individual to teach provided they meet the requirements set forth in relevant statute or state board policy. That's the idea of we may not lay out every single particular type of license that there may be available for different types of instruction, but that we would still make sure that all our people, if we are permitted to hire people with different licensing requirements, that we will meet those licensing requirements. With regard to this particular policy, it would replace our current policy 3100 in the old manual. As I said, we have added in language related to our actions or the work that we do right now. For example, with regard to provisional licenses, making it sure that the employees know that it's their responsibility to follow through and satisfy the requirements of a provisional license so that they can meet licensure extension, and making it clear that failure to do that could result in a non-renewal of a contract. That's something that our licensure team spends a lot of time working on, provisional licenses, making sure people are meeting their licensure requirements, sending out notices and those sorts of things, because we can't continue to hire them or keep them in place without the appropriate licensure requirements. So we want to make sure our employees understand that. We also talk about in number 3, other alternative licensure, and using those alternative licensure when there are no other appropriately licensed candidates available to fill a licensure position, a teacher position. And then, as I said, Section B deals with different exceptions to the licensure requirements, and we try to just kind of focus on those that we see more often, and then for the rest of those, we mark those out, but understanding that there may be other exceptions that we will follow if the law permits us to hire a teacher with one of those exceptions. So we removed some of the adjunct instructor, we removed the Cherokee language, the driver education, We kept in the service members. That seemed to be a more current area that we thought would be good to have in for the district. And then we included any other exceptions that we're permitted to hire someone under. We'll follow those exceptions. With regard to the beginner teacher program, just clarified in here, teachers with fewer than 3 years of public school K-12 teaching experience would follow the beginning teacher support program. And then in section E, dealing with license renewal, just making it clear that any cost related to license renewal is the responsibility of the employee. You'll see on the last page of the policy, we removed section F, dealing with parental notification, because that information is covered in our Title I parent and family engagement policy in the new manual, policy 1320/3560. So we didn't feel like it was necessary to be here in this policy. But we are open to any questions or discussions that you all have about our suggested modifications to this policy.
Questions or feedback? Ms. Caulfield? Okay, hearing none, I'll entertain.
Questions? Thank you.
Yes.
I don't have any questions, thank you.
Oh, sorry. Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Motion to approve and send to first reading.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please note by saying aye. Any opposed, same sign. The motion carries. Thank you.
That would be all that we have for
For
today.
today. For
Yes,
today.
for today.
Ms. Hill, for today.
We anticipate seeing you later.
I understand there are many more policies to
There are, in
migrate.
fact. Well, thank you all.
Thank you
We
all very
appreciate
much.
it.
Thank you.
Okay. Ryan and I have a conversation that we don't have to adjourn our meetings because they're committee meetings.
Well, Ms. Johnson-Hostler, before we officially then disperse, I do want to thank you for your chairmanship of policy, because as you know, Ms. Johnson-Hostler chaired policy and finance for the past year, double duty, and that was a huge lift. So
That was huge, and thank you, Monique, for doing that. That was,
Well, luckily, I just
A
carried
lot.
the water from the legislature.
well, there's that.
thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Okay. Thank you very much. We will officially end our policy meeting just in time for me to get to my BAC on time. And thank you, Ms. Caulfield, for joining us.
I appreciate it. Thank you for moving to the boardroom and doing the WebEx. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Have a good evening.
You too.